So today on Frugal Finance, we're going to look at what is Section 20 of the Landlord and Tenant Act. I know, yet another boring subject, but it's about leasehold property and it will really help people understand what their rights and obligations are when they receive these notices from freeholders. I see time and time again people get served the notices, especially the stage one, and they don't understand what they're looking at, and it goes in the BIN file, and then next thing they know they're presented with a humongous bill and it's out of the blue. But it isn't out of the blue because they've had the notices, they've just decided to sort of ignore them or maybe didn't understand them. So in this video we're going to look at all of the stages and really what the processes are of Section 20 and what that means for you as a leaseholder and also a freeholder's point of view. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. So what is Section 20? So Section 20 is a part of the Landlord and Tenant Act which basically says a freeholder can't spend over a certain amount of money on a building without notifying the occupiers or the leaseholders. So basically, if you're a block of 10 and you all pay the same amount, so let's have this as an example. So block of 10, you all pay the same amount. If the freeholder needs to spend £3,000 on the building, that is going to be more than £250 per person. And that means it triggers Section 20. So Section 20, generally speaking, is when the highest contributing person pays more than £250 to the bill. So what you need to work out, first of all, is it Section 20 qualifying? So you've got to work out what is the total bill and then work out which is the highest paying flat, and does that flat, their share, their split in the lease, contribute more than £250 towards that bill. If it does, then you must do Section 20. So that's your first protocol. Second protocol is you must issue the notices correctly. So there is a stage one notice. The stage one notice basically tells the leaseholders that the freeholder is intending to enter into an agreement which is above the Section 20 limit, and it is for the following items, and they have to give a brief description. It doesn't have to be mega detailed, it just needs to basically list out the basics. So if you're repairing and painting the outside of your building, it could be repair and external redecorations and overhaul of gutters or rainwater goods, something like that. That's a pretty captive description, but at the same time short and sweet. And that notice, when you receive that notice, you'll see there's a section towards the end of it, Section 6 I think it is, or point 6, which basically says you as a leaseholder have the right for 30 days until the notice expires, that is, to put forward contractors for the freeholder to try and obtain a tender from. Now, the freeholder's obligation here is to actually take your recommendations and try and obtain a tender. Now, often people say, oh, they'll never bother and so on, and they'll not bother submitting them. Well, this is your golden opportunity to put forward contractors that you want to quote for the jobs. Your mate down the road, the guy that did your house extension that gave you a really good price. Those people, put them forward. There's a few key things most freeholders will look for when you do this. That is, are they insured and do they belong to trade bodies if there's a guarantee in place or a need for a guarantee? So like a roofing job, for instance. There's no point in using Fred who's got insurance but can't guarantee the roof. You remember, you're not the only person living in this building, so the freeholder is answerable for all 10, 12, 20, 100 people that are in the building. So assuming that your contractor meets those criteria, they're obliged to try and obtain a tender. Now, some freeholders will try and obtain a tender, others will make a wishy-washy job of doing it. They'll send them a letter and then they'll never chase them up because they don't really want to be involved with contractors that they don't really work with and understand. So it's key that you stay in touch with your contractor to make sure they are receiving the packs and the information. Obviously, if they choose not to quote for the job, then they should really reply back and say it's not for us. Because what tends to happen is between the stage 1 and this next stage, stage 2, is a surveyor will prepare a specification, or a property manager if it's a smaller task, and they will send that pack out to all the contractors so that they're all quoting on the same basis. So once you've got all your tenders back and they've been analysed and all the contractors now have been contacted and the spread of quotes is all fair and everybody is quoted on the same like for like, then a stage 2 notice is issued. The stage 2 notice basically lists out what all of the prices were. Were there any recommendations from leaseholders? Were there any questions during phase 1? Because there's also a point in phase 1 where you can add observations. They're not observations like, I don't want to do the section 20. There might be observations like, when you repair the roof, bear in mind the skylight is not covered. It is a leaseholder responsibility. It's not part of the building. That might be an observation. So any observations, any contractors that were submitted, they have to go into the stage 2 notice, and then it lists out exactly what they are and keyly who the freeholder is actually going to use for the job. Now, they don't have to use the cheapest person, but if they don't use the cheapest person or contractor, tender, they must specify why they're not using the cheapest. And their reasons can be really quite good or a bit wishy-washy. They need to be able to defend themselves if that's questioned. So things like the painter and decorator did the front elevation 2 years ago and he did a really good job. He's not the cheapest now, but we'd like to use him again. That's a reasonable assumption. It's fair to use the same quality of contractor to do 2 different elevations. If the price is, say, within 5% of each other, that's not material, the tribunal would decide. If it was quadruple the price, that's ridiculous. What is it that's made him? Maybe he underpriced the first job and therefore he's now trying to recoup his money. So that's what the freeholder must do. They must serve you the stage 2 notice, and that lists out all the things. In there, normally it will say whether or not there is enough funds to pay for these works, and they should really give an indication, although there's no actual real requirement to say if the reserve fund or funds held on account will be sufficient to cover the job. And then the stage 3 normally is the letter basically saying the works are going ahead and here's where they're starting and so on. So it's a notification letter. The stage 3 doesn't look as formal as the stage 1 and stage 2. They're preset designs. Stage 3 is basically notifying you the works are going ahead now. The main issue that I find is that people tend to not understand the notices. They stick their head in the sand and they don't really want to know about it. And then once the stage 2 is finished, often what happens is you get your share of the bill. So if there isn't enough money in the pot, you get your bill for £1,000 or more, perhaps if it's a bigger job. And that's the first time the shock sets in. And then often a lot of people say, well, I've got a friend down the road who can quote for these jobs and the rest of it. But by then the freeholders probably said, well, I gave you all those opportunities. I did the legal process. You did nothing. Sorry, we're proceeding with this. And unfortunately, if you go to a tribunal, it'd be a pretty weak argument that I stuck my head in the sand and didn't realise what was going on until the last minute. And now I'd like to disrupt the process, and then potentially, if say it was a roof leak, the poor person on the top floor has to wait a bit longer whilst you get Fred the roofer to quote. And bear in mind, they have to quote on the same tender's pack specifications surveyors prepared, because otherwise their quote won't be like for like against the others and then will be useless. During the process, we get an awful lot of people. From time to time, they will get their own quotations and go, well, here's a quote for the roof works. Again, the freeholder's not obliged to use that quote. You're best off saying, here's the contact. So Fred the builder, for instance, you say to the managing agents or the freeholder, here's Fred's details, I'd like to nominate him. Not here's Fred's quote, because then they'll go, well, I'll just stick that in the BIN file because it doesn't follow the surveyor's specifications. There might be additional works. You've got to remember, a lot of contractors get a little bit scared when surveyors get involved because they will force them to do things. They won't pay them until they're correct. A lot of them don't like working in that commercial environment. There are fines potentially if you don't complete projects on time, so then contractors start getting scared by that, and it takes a certain style of contractor, but the surveyor is there to be independent from the freeholder and from the leaseholder and be fair about everything. So those are the kind of key stages of section 20, if you like. Obviously, if the freeholder doesn't do that and then spends money, you have the option of pursuing them through the tribunal and saying you spent money that was over section 20 and you didn't consult with me. But you have to remember that your reward from the tribunal will only ever be the amount of money that they spent that was over the section 20. So let's say you're in that block of 10 and the section 20 limit's 250 and you all pay the same and they spend £3,000. It's your share of £500, because obviously you've got £2,500, up to £2,500 they can spend without consulting, and then after that they have to consult. So they didn't consult on the additional £500. So, and it's your share of that £500 that you'll be looking at. You have to remember it's a total bill as well, so it's 250 including VAT, so it's not plus VAT. There are some caveats to it all. You can apply for what they call retrospective consent. So if the freeholder cracked on with the job because he had water absolutely pouring in, and then later someone challenged him, he's entitled, or she is entitled to go to the tribunal and ask for retrospective consent or dispensation from the section 20 process. You can apply for that afterwards, or you can apply for that prior to doing it, or you can even run alongside the normal notice an application for dispensation. So those are ways to kind of shortcut it, if you like. Or if the freeholder acts and says, look, we can't have Mrs. Smith on the top floor having water pouring in, we needed to crack on, and then Mr. Jones on the third floor says, well, hang on a minute, you've spent too much money here, you've triggered section 20, you didn't do the process properly. In all honesty, as long as they can justify they did it and it was reasonable to do that without following section 20, and they backed it up by maybe getting other quotes, or they've got another site where they can have a comparison to it. The surveyor who oversaw the job is prepared to stand there and say, look, the pricing is reasonable compared to other market rate around here. You probably got a good chance of doing that. Obviously, things like the painting of the outside of the building is not going to be particularly an urgent matter for dispensation, but obviously if the outside of the building needs painting, you started at section 20, then a big chunk of render falls off in the night or something, and you've got water now pouring in, well, that is urgent. So you have to make a decision as a freeholder. Is it urgent that we just repair the render, or should we start the main project even though we haven't done the section 20? So they have a difficult decision to make. Obviously, as leaseholders, you always remain responsible for funding it. So you have to bear all those things in mind. If you'd like more information on section 20, or if you've got any issues, please do comment below in the description. In the comment section. Have a look at the descriptions. You can see my main firm's website in there. If you can subscribe to the channel, I will do more on leasehold stuff as well as all the other bits of property and stock market and so on. Essentially, if you want to know more or you have a query, please do get in touch. Please don't ignore the stage 1 notices and the stage 2 notices. They are really important, and you can really kind of rub the freeholder up the wrong way or delay the process by suddenly jumping in at the last minute and saying, oh, well, I didn't realise this. And often freeholders won't want to listen to you, I'm afraid. And if you're in a residents association, often people do listen to you and say, well, you've got a much cheaper quote. And then, of course, the surveyor will say, well, let me get a quote from them, and then it's more delays, isn't it? So, it's in your interest at the end of the day, whilst the freeholder is the freeholder, and obviously they still have this leasehold stuff. Please check out the videos that I've done recently on the new legislation for leasehold. But essentially the freeholder is obviously in charge in the main, but you've got to look after your asset, so you need to repair and maintain that building. So it's your interest. Don't just stick your head in the sand. It's very easy to do that and very easy to ignore the letters. So once again, if you could comment below, subscribe. There's various links to things like Trading 212 if you want to start up a portfolio with them. Any further assistance you need, please do let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.